Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here this morning to share some of my thoughts on the subject matter of effective communication in English language. But before I go to doing that, I want to recognize very warmly some members of the high seat and very distinguished members of this institution. I want to recognize the provost and thank him too and his team for approving that I should be here this morning. I also want to thank the deans of the various schools in the college. I want to thank the heads of departments of the schools that there are in the college, especially the head of the GNS unit for giving me this privilege to be here this morning. As much as I can and as time will permit, I will share with us some of my thoughts on that topic, effective communication in English. And because of the fact that I'm a teacher and I want to teach this morning, I have reduced a lot of the things I will say into schemes so that I will stir up some water. That is, I'll provoke us to go to think and to read. I forgot to say it. Thank God it didn't escape my mind completely. I want to appreciate Professor Mrs. EGWUE. She is my teacher. She may not recognize me. That's why it's good to behave well wheresoever you are, because you don't know where you'll find people that will be talking about you in the future or at any time. Professor Mrs. EGWUE does not recognize me this morning, but coming in here and seeing her, I was humbled. I said, I hope I will not be jittering when I am talking in front of my teacher. So I appreciate you very sincerely. Thank you for the impacts you made. Some of those things you contributed to us are the things I will be speaking and sharing with this audience this morning. So I appreciate you very sincerely. Now, I will not bore us so much. I have divided the presentation into parts, amongst which I will attempt to clarify some terminologies in the title of the presentation. I'll do a brief talk on the history of communication. I will also talk about some basic skills in language. I'll talk about the types of communication that there are. I'll talk about the process of communication and tell us about some elements of what makes effective communication. And then I'll talk about some hindrances to effective communication. I understand my audience is mixed. As much as possible, I shall try to carry everybody along. Now, with the first aspect, effective. The word effective, according to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, is anything that is adequate in producing a desired or intended result or in accomplishing a purpose. Communication, on the other hand, is what we do when we exchange information, either by speaking, by writing, by other means that I have in the life of this speech called language skills. Now, when we bring the two terms together to make effective communication, it is a process of exchanging ideas, thoughts, knowledge, and information so that the purpose of a speech or any instructional process is achieved. So there is not going to be any good claim to communication taking place if the persons who were in the audience have not understood what was said. Communication is as old as man is. Permit me to go into the scripture a little to talk about the experience at the Tower of Babel, which is in the book of Genesis chapter 1 verse 9. If you are conversant with that portion of scripture, the summary of that content of scripture is what happened at the Tower of Babel when the people of old decided to build a tower that they wanted to be as high as heaven. Now, they were achieving their aim until God found that if he allowed them succeed, they may pose a threat to him. Now, what he did was to introduce disagreements in their languages, such that when one person was saying to the member of the other team that they were working together, go and bring cement, the person went and brought gun. Now, when he said, go and bring water, the person went and brought stones. Now, what that did was to disintegrate them, that is, make them not succeed in achieving their aim of building a tower that will get to the heavens. What I am bringing out from there that is important to us this morning is this, that communication is effective to the extent that the intention for which the person who is passing on a message achieves his or her aim. I want to take that again, that what makes effective communication is ability to drive home a point. Now, the moment that is done, that is, the moment somebody is able to drive home a point to the extent that the persons who listened to the presentation or to the speech, like I'm doing now, the moment they are able to pick 1 point or 2 points or the general points that the speech summarizes, communication has taken place. Now, what is the relationship between effective communication and language skills? Somebody, please. Okay, thank you. Basic language skills. All the languages that are spoken in the world, including English language, which happens to be the tool we are using this morning, have 4 skills, regardless of who the speakers of the language are and what they are using the language for. The skills are the skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Now, for somebody to claim he knows any language, I'm saying any language because it is not with bias to English. If you claim you know any language in the world and you are deficient in any of these 4 key areas, then your claim to knowing that language can be questioned. If you cannot listen to somebody converse or speak or talk to you in that language, you don't know the language. If you cannot speak the language, you don't know it. If you cannot read any piece of literature that is written in that language, you don't know it. And then if you cannot write the language, you do not know the language. Now, the skills of listening and reading are used to take in information. In other words, we refer to them as receptive skills. Now, while those of speaking and writing are productive because we use it to pass on or say something to the persons who listen to us. Now, there are certain things that are key to each of these skills that I want to attempt to summarize. It is not good listening practice to immediately disagree with persons when we listen to them. It is more cautious that when you are in an audience like this one now, there are going to be probably some of the things that I will say may not be things that will go down well with some members of this audience. But it will be uncautious for anybody to immediately raise an eyebrow to say that, Mr. George or Dr. George, what you are saying about this piece of information or about this subject matter is not correct or is not agreeable to me. So every listening practice involves some diligence. That's not just enough. It is not going to be good listening practice to immediately jump into conclusions while a speech is being made. You have not listened through to the end and you have already drawn your conclusion about the speech. It is not a good listening practice. It's also not good to tune out. What do I mean by tuning out when you are listening? To be distracted. A speech, somebody is doing a speech or you are in a class and your lecturer is teaching, and without paying particular attention and without being careful, you find that you are distracted. That makes you lose a lot from the presentation that is being made. Now, with regard to speaking, it is not good practice too to come before an audience without preparing. So good speakers are people that take their time to prepare for their speeches before they come before their audience to do a presentation. It's also important that good speakers know their audience. You have to know who your listeners are, because that is key in determining whether you'll be successful in communicating with them or not. Then, there are what I call the master 3 T's of effective speeches. It's good when you are doing a speech to, as much as you can, let your audience know what you want to tell them from the beginning. For instance, before I started this speech, I have taken a rundown of all the things I will capture during the life of the speech. That is one characteristic of a good speech. It should be one that carries the audience from the beginning along about what the speech is about. And then good speeches also make audience know what will be said during the speech. It's not enough to say all that will be said from the beginning until the end. You should be able to tell them per time what area or what segment of the speech you are currently taking. I want to leave that. If we go next to the other skill, the third skill of languages, it's writing. Good writing is one that is clear and purposeful. Good writing realizes that you don't have to say everything at a stretch. Those of us who are teachers, when we teach, we don't cover the syllabus in one day. Even though there are teachers that are not dedicated to their work. And as a result, when the exam is almost due, that is when they come to class. And by that, they want to say all that they would have been saying during a 3-month period in one class. That is not good. It's not good enough for us as teachers and for our students as people that listen to us. It's also very important that as much as possible, when you write, you avoid mistakes of grammar, you avoid mistakes of punctuation, you avoid mistakes of spelling. How do you do that? Make it a practice to always go over the things you say. It has been established that a lot of times our brains work faster than our hands are working. So some of the times when we write, we find that our hands are putting down things different from what the brain is signaling. Now, how are you able to detect that? It is when you are somebody who is very good at going over the things you have written, because sometimes you find that you have written something that is quite different from what your brain wanted you to write. It's also important that when you write, you don't use excessively big words. Some of us who are students, sometimes when we write, we want to impress our lecturers and make them know we know English. It is not a very good practice to use very big words when there are simpler words that could be used. Then it's also important that when we write, we use descriptive words that will enable our listeners have some life injected into the things we say to them. It's also important that when you write, you don't assume. In fact, when you even speak, you don't assume. You don't assume that your audience know the things you want to say. Say the much that you can say about that particular subject matter you are sharing with them, because by that, you are making an effective speech. There is what I refer to as the pyramid style of writing. The pyramid style of writing, we know what a pyramid is. Something that has a tip at the top, and then a broadened or a spread out base. Now, a pyramid it has a sharp tip. Now, when we write and use the pyramid style of writing, what we do is to say the best things we have to say about the subject matter to which we're writing in the beginning. You don't leave out very salient points about what you are writing about till the end, because a lot of times it has been, from experience, shown that people who read, I don't know whether it's applicable here, are not patient enough to read to the end. So if you have not said some of the key things you have to say in the beginning, what happens to you if your reader loses interest in the life of your script and does not read it to the end? You find that you'll be losing a lot. Now, it has also been established by research that a lot of Nigerians speak good English. They also can read in English, but they are not very good at listening and writing. The reason is this: if you find that, I'm saying this, I can challenge anybody with it. If you find that you are struggling with writing, I want to say to you that if you want to get a remedy to that, give yourself to a lot of reading, because from research it has been established that a lot of reading expresses itself in our writings. So if you notice that you are deficient in your writing, I am observing to you that that is probably, in fact most likely, because you are not reading enough. So if you have that problem, please try it and find out what the result will be. It will be a shocker to you. There are different types of communication. In fact, as I prepared for this presentation, I found that there were a lot of models, but I decided to stick to this model that is projected on the screen. That is the model where communication is divided into two, where we have communication based on channel and communication based on style, or the intention or purpose for which the speech is being made. Now, according to the classification of communication by channel, communication may be through verbal means or through non-verbal means. Now, when it is non-verbal, it may be through facial expressions, it may be through gestures, it may be through body languages, it may be through proximity, it may be through touch or silence. Now, in the verbal form, we have oral and written presentations or communications. Now, under oral communication, they may be face-to-face communication or distant communication. Now, with reference to the second leg, where we have communication based on style, that may be formal or informal. In fact, according to another taxonomy, which I love so much and wish to share with us, communication can be classed or classified into three broad groups. That is, according to, and if you look at it, it's not very far from this model that is displayed on the screen. Communication may be divided into three broad categories. That is, according to organizational structure, and under that we have formal and informal communication. Communication may be according to, that is, after the classification on organizational structure, we may also have communication based on the direction of communication. Communication may be upward. For instance, if the provost of this college wishes to do a communication or do a dialogue with maybe the commissioner for education in this state, the commissioner is not directly in the hierarchy of this establishment. As far as I know and understand, the provost is the highest administrative officer here. Now, if he has to do communication upward, that is to say he'll be communicating to somebody who may not be directly in the hierarchy of organization in this place, but is important. Now, if he wants or has to communicate to the commissioner of education, because this is a school, he will be communicating upward. Ditto for all the students here. If they have to communicate to their deans or heads of departments, the communication will be upward, because they are speaking or relating in communication with somebody who is higher than them. It may be downward, the dean or the HOD communicating with members of staff under them, or the dean communicating with heads of department under them, or the provost of the institution communicating with deans of the various schools that there are. That is a downward form of communication. It may be lateral, it may be diagonal, it may be inward or outward. Now, according to mode of expression, we may have verbal and non-verbal communication. I have talked about it in the model that was displayed a while ago. Communication has a process, and every member of that process is insignificant. That is, you cannot do without, it's indispensable. You cannot do without any of them. If you attempt to take any of them away from the communication process, it will crumble. There is who we refer to in the communication process as the sender. In our language, what we may call our lecturers and our teachers. At one time, they are people who initiate, they sustain, and they implement what happens in our classrooms. I said, in the communication process, the sender is just too valuable to be thrown away. If you remove him and the role he or she plays, the communication process will crumble. So the sender in this context will be our teachers. And now what they do, what they pass on to us is content, which will, in this message, or in this model, will refer to as a message. Now, if there is no message or no idea or no content to be passed across, then there will not be the need for a sender. So senders have their existence because they have things they want to say. They have messages they want to pass across. Now, that message is as important as the man that is sending the message. If this was a purely English language class, I would have told us about what is referred to as form and content. If there is no form, there cannot be content. And if there is no content, there cannot be form. The two are just too indispensable. So if there is no message to be passed across, there will not be need for a sender. Now, down the ladder again from the sender is the arrow that tells us about who receivers are. Receivers in our context are students. What is it that we should bear in mind when we communicate with them? Readiness. A lot of times, a while ago while I was talking, I said, I made reference or allusion to teachers who want to cover content that they would have covered in a 3-month period in one day because of obvious reasons. Now, such teachers do not take into consideration the factor of readiness. It's possible that those students you want to communicate all that you would have been telling them during the 3-month period are not ready to take that content. And as a result, communication will not take place because you cannot put away the place of readiness in the communication process. Now, there is also the psychological perspective to students' readiness too. It's one thing for them to be ready. It's another thing for their minds and brains to be ready. It's another thing that you don't overload them. There is what is referred to as cognitive overload, where you say more than you should be saying per time. There is, as adults, it's been established that our attention, there's what we refer to as attention span. There is a limit to which you can be talking and people will be able to go with you. Now, the moment that limit is exceeded, all that you are doing will just be a mere waste of your time. And by that, communication is not effective. Now, feedback is the fourth leg of the model. Feedback, important part of the model. What is feedback for? Feedback is to give you information about how effective or how far you have achieved your aim. There are 7 C's of effective communication. The message should be clear, the message should be correct, the message should be complete, it should be concrete, it should be concise. You should give consideration to who your senders are, and you should obey some speech procedures, that is, you should be cautious. Communication can be ineffectivized, that is, can be hindered by some of these. Some of the times, poor planning affects communication. Sometimes, poorly worded messages affect communication. Sometimes, deficiency in the language of communication, which I refer to as semantic problems, affects communication. Sometimes, status difference between the sender and the receiver affects the effectiveness of communication. Sometimes, also, the difference in the perception of the sender and the receiver affects the effectiveness of communication. And sometimes, the environment. Imagine that somebody is in a class teaching, and somebody else is working on the roof of that same class. There will be a lot of ineffectiveness in that communication. And then there will be sometimes loss as a result of poor transmission style or model. As I sum up, I want to say that You cannot put away students and teachers in the life or in any discourse about effective communication. Both play very important roles and occupy very important positions. Now, so if communication must be effective, and when it is effective, it makes learning easier. The students will enjoy learning. They are not struggling to learn. Then the teacher is also able to achieve his or her goals, because before any good teacher goes to class, he sets targets. Oh, at the end of this class, I want to ensure that my students have done this, this, and this, and that. Now, if you are going to be effective or successful in achieving that, it must be that you have communicated effectively. Communication that is effective also helps to increase and strengthen the communication and relationship between students and their teacher. I want to, at this juncture, because I'm being asked to stop talking, say that what effective communication is that communication that strives to achieve specific goals that are both in the interest of the teacher and their learners. I want to thank you all at this point for giving me attention. Good morning once again.